To the background of the protests and how city prepared police priorities. I will inform you about the demonstrations in Berlin last August from a police point of view. The reasons for the assemblies were the restrictions because of the pandemic with constitutional rights inflicted. Demonstrations in this context with more than 10,000 to follow were a new phenomenon. The reluctance to follow police regulations and to refuse communications were new as well. Disinformation campaigns, conspiracy theories, and the influence of social media is an unusual subject to work with for police. Priorities were fighting a pandemic under special regulations for persons in a crowd, planning based on open source intelligence and information from police and other security services, the protection of Jewish life and political institutions, traffic planning in the city, protecting peaceful demonstrations. Most important considerations were the announcement for demonstrations against the national corona countermeasures offered several challenges for the police from the beginning of the planning. They were organized by a businessman from Stuttgart who had already organized demonstrations with up to 9,000 participants. Corona countermeasures since March 2020 included several legal aspects affecting constitutional rights to fight the pandemic. A situation with severe impacts towards individual rights because of a pandemic is unique in history of the Federal Republic of Germany. The most important consideration was to prevent this day become a super spreading event. Priorities were dialogue with obligations for protective measures like distance and the obligation for everyone wearing protective masks. This communication is a mandatory ruling in German law for demonstrations. The organizer has the obligation to inform the audience and consequently enforce its content. Tactical planning for crowd management in public spaces for a walk of about 7 kilometers through the city of Berlin and continuing afterwards with an assembly very next to the parliament, the official residence of the president, and also next to the official residence of the Chancellor of the Federal Republic of Germany as well. The planning was led by the announcement of 1,000 persons for the route and up to 10,000 for the assembly afterwards. So the planning for police forces followed the announcement confirmed by official estimates from Stuttgart and from Berlin authorities. Intelligence informed us about political extreme right mobilization to come to Berlin this day too. So we coordinated a route without passing institutions of Jewish life and memorial sites in Berlin, cooperating this with the responsible for the demonstration. At the same time, we were providing efficient protection for Jewish life in Berlin and for political institutions. 1st of August, we faced up to 17,000 participants on little space wanting to go for the route and afterwards to assemble again. Police units to protect the participants from traffic and for tactical intervention were much too little. The regulations for healthcare were ignored completely, and the organizational crew wasn't able to enforce the regulations. They were ignored too. After hours of communication to enforce the regulations, calling for reinforcement for operational units to deal with the crowd, and informing my superiors about the situation at scene, I then had to decide to ban the demonstration. Before I could do so, their organizational head left the scene, telling me to formally end his responsibility now for the demonstration with up to 17,000 individuals on their way. Keeping close contact to the organizational head of the assembly afterwards, I informed him about the new situation and his obligations. He in return told me not to cooperate and not to follow the regulations and not to enforce these towards the assembly. Meanwhile, up to 30,000 persons. In contrary, he used his stages with his technical equipment to ask everybody to stay, to sit down and resist and not to follow the regulations. The organizing person told he would not follow or give up, So I rearranged the tactical units to end the assembly and disperse the crowd. What was the effect on polarization at a community level and which groups were targeted? To end an ongoing assembly with more than 20,000 participants by police order is rare. Tactical units to carry away more than 20,000 mostly sitting persons by far weren't enough. There were several temporary arrests for identification, but no violence at a bigger scale. Political extreme right persons on the scene showed up not as much as expected. Most of the persons refused to follow police order to leave the scene. The crowd composed of a bright spread of individuals without extreme political ideas. After that day, we prepared for the next demonstrations at the end of August with exactly the same organizational heads and the same setting for route and assembly. 38,000 participants came the end of August. The demonstration was banned before, with confirmation by court, going the way up to German's constitutional court, allowing it under firm pandemic-based regulations. The demonstration started, but ended as well banned because of reluctance to follow the regulations. The pictures from the crowd entering the stairs of our German parliament building followed. Later that year, we had to deal with several other similar big demonstrations of this movement. Challenges, successes, and lessons learned. Dealing with protests concerning the pandemic offered a huge variety of challenges for the police and is still going on to do so. All over Germany, demonstrations normally offer a wide variety of ideas and create a part of public life, accentuating one of the central fundamental rights of freedom of expression and speech in public, even if these opinions are subject to controversial issues or conspiracy theories. The limits for these protests under legislation in Germany are very wide, but nevertheless existing. Police task in these times is to deal with these situations, but also take care of respecting the legal limits. Lessons learned. Communication between police and organizers is obligatory during all stages of planning demonstrations. Gathering intelligence from open sources is complicated because of given legal limits and closed user groups in social media. Protest against corona regulations is not an offense, so police is acting with normal population, even if these protests conclude weird content. Police always has the obligation to distinguish between peaceful and violent forms of protest. Crossing limits during demonstrations will have immediate consequences exercised by police authorities. Fighting a pandemic offers only little time for long explanations toward a crowd not willing to cooperate at all. Police action to disperse the crowd follows quickly. Attacks against political institutions will be prevented and stopped immediately. Attacks against policewomen, policemen will be suspended. Anti-Semitic speech will be cut off and prosecuted. Protests will keep going on as long as the coronavirus isn't defeated by progress with immunization. The next big demonstrations, Berlin, we face next month on 20th of March.